Forbidden Love, Miami. Episode 3. The Evidence. What he left behind. For everyone who started from the beginning and stayed. ACT 1. What he left behind. The kitchen table at Marta's house on the west side of Hialeah was not large enough, on most nights, to hold all the things the family put on it: a school project, a broken cell phone awaiting repair. Marta's reading glasses on top of the newspaper she read for 20 minutes each morning before anyone else woke up. Tonight the children's homework had been moved. The bills had been moved. The mail had been gathered and set aside. The table held only what Valentina had arranged on it, and she had arranged it with the precision of someone who understood that some things needed to be seen in relation to each other, because that was the only way the pattern became visible. The forged permit. Her father's photograph, the one from his city inspector's ID card, the one she had carried in her wallet for 4 years because she could not bring herself to put it away. A cream-colored envelope with nothing on the outside, weighted down at the edge by a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. Diana Voss's note inside it, for words in handwriting so composed it could have been a font. Some things stay buried. DV. Valentina was not crying. She had moved past that. Not because the grief had finished, it had not finished. It would not finish for a very long time, possibly ever, but because she had arrived at the place beyond tears where the mind becomes very clear and very cold and very purposeful. It was a place she recognized. She had been there the morning they told her about the scaffold. She had been there the night she sat in her car outside the city planning office and read the first page of the incident report. Grief, she had learned, had a temperature, and at its coldest it became almost useful. She laid it all out in her mind the way she would lay out an architectural plan, the structural elements, the load-bearing walls, the points of failure. What she knew, the signature on the final permit was not her father's. The forensic specialist had confirmed it. The land acquisition for the Solara project had proceeded on the authority of that signature, his name, his position, his professional credibility, offered without his consent. Used to move a corrupt approval through the city planning system while he was still alive and still fighting. They had used his name before they killed him. They had needed him silent, and when silence couldn't be purchased, they arranged a different kind. What she knew, Diana Voss knew she was digging. The note said so. For words that read like a goodbye and a warning folded into the same sentence. What she knew, Camille Okafor was in surgery 2 miles east of here, and the recording Camille had been carrying to Marco at 11:48 in the morning was now unknown on a phone, in a car, somewhere in the wreckage of a hit-and-run on I-395 that was not an accident. It had never been an accident. Valentina knew the shape of accidents by now. They did not look like this. What she knew, Rafi was safe tonight. Rafi was at Dario's. That was enough for tonight. What she knew, Marco had submitted the forgery evidence to the specialist and told no one else. What she knew, Marco had held her hand in a doorway in the rain and she had let him, and neither of them had spoken about it, and it was the only thing in the past 48 hours that felt true in a way that wasn't terrible. The television murmured through the wall. One of Marta's children had left a crayon drawing stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a mango, a house, a sun, a figure with enormous hands, which Valentina was fairly certain was a dog. The sofrito smell came from the walls themselves, from 20 years of meals, from the accumulated evidence of a family that ate together and argued together, and showed up for each other with the particular stubbornness of people who understood that love was a daily practice and not a singular event. Her father had eaten at this table. He had sat in this kitchen. He had been someone who showed up. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She stared at it for 2 full rings, watching the screen light up and go dark and light up again, watching the way the glow fell across the permit documents spread before her. She picked it up. She answered. Yes, she said. The voice on the other end was low and careful, and it carried the particular cadence of someone who had grown up in Miami before it was expensive, the Spanish and English so naturally braided together that the seam between them was invisible. The voice said, "You don't know me, but I knew your father." She did not move. Her hand on the table went flat against the permit documents, palm down, fingers spread, as if anchoring herself to something solid while the rest of the world shifted. The refrigerator hummed. The crayon house on the magnet was very yellow in the kitchen light. "Tell me your name," Valentina said. Her voice was steady. It was the steadiness of someone who had been expecting this call without knowing she was expecting it, and now that it had come, every part of her was listening. "My name is Elena Santos. I worked in Miami-Dade City planning for 22 years. Your father and I handled a lot of permit reviews together. He trusted me. For years ago, he gave me something and told me to keep it safe. He said if anyone ever came asking about the Port District permits, I should give it to them." Valentina's hand pressed harder against the documents. She said, "What did he give you?" "A USB drive. With things on it I think you need to see." The rain on Marta's tin roof was very loud now, or perhaps it had been loud all along and Valentina was only just hearing it. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose. She said, "Where are you?" "Hialeah. Same as you tonight, I think. Meet me tomorrow. There's a café on Okeechobee Road, Cafeteria La Palma, the one with the blue awning. 9 in the morning. Come alone." Valentina said, "How will you know it's me? How will you know I'm the person he meant?" Elena was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that contains a considered answer rather than an absent one. Then she said, "Because you asked the right question," Elena said. "That's how I knew." The call ended. Valentina set the phone down on the table next to her father's photograph. She looked at his face, the slightly awkward angle of the ID photo, the way he had not quite known what to do with his expression when the camera came out, so he had settled on dignified and ended up looking merely earnest, which was, she thought, more accurate than dignified anyway. He had been an earnest man, a careful man, a man who read every line of every document and pushed back when things didn't line up. She said very quietly in Spanish, in the kitchen of Marta's house in Hialeah while the rain came down, "Okay, Papa." "Okay." The television murmured through the wall. The refrigerator hummed. The coffee in the mug had gone fully cold. She did not sleep that night, but she sat with her father's photograph and she was not alone in the room, and that for now was something. Marco Duval had long since learned that hospitals, like precincts, rewarded the appearance of authority over its actual possession. He moved through Jackson Memorial with the particular economy of a man who had spent 15 years learning which doors opened for a badge and which ones didn't, and who had the patience to find the correct angle for the ones that were slow to open. He found the attending physician for Camille Okafor's case in the corridor outside the surgical wing, a woman in her 40s with the particular briskness of someone managing 3 crises simultaneously. He showed his badge. He asked 3 specific questions. He listened to the answers. Out of surgery. Stable. Broken collarbone, concussion, lacerations from the windshield glass. The car had caught her on the I-395 ramp and kept moving. A blue sedan. No plates anyone had caught clearly. Hit and run over town. No witnesses who had stayed. The driver had not stopped. He asked to see her. He was told she was sedated, post-operative, and that visitors would be permitted in the morning when she was more stable. He did not argue. He thanked the physician and stood in the corridor for a moment beneath the fluorescent light, in the antiseptic smell of a place that dealt professionally with crisis, in the particular silence of a hospital at 2 in the morning when the emergencies had either resolved or were resolving and the wards had settled into the suspended quality of managed waiting. She had texted him at 11:10. "I'm coming. 38 minutes. Be somewhere we can talk." At 11:48, she was on a stretcher on an I-395 ramp. The math of that was not complicated. The math of that was the kind of math that made him want to put his hands on something solid and push until it gave. He had felt this weight before. He knew its specific geography, the way it settled across the back of the shoulders and the base of the throat, the way it made everything feel both too loud and too far away. He had felt it the night Darius Okafor called him from a traffic stop and Marco had said I'll be there in 20 and arrived in 17 and still, been 2 minutes too late. 3 years, and he had not yet found the precise configuration of words that explained how a man carries that particular arithmetic without folding under it. He was still working on it. He had not been able to protect Darius. He had not been able to protect Camille. He was running out of people he cared about and out of ways to keep them safe, and he was also running out of time. He did not go to the waiting room. He went to his car in the hospital parking lot. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel and the engine off, the parking lot light falling at the particular angle of 2 in the morning, flat, unglamorous, honest in the way that only fluorescent things in the middle of the night are honest. He called Torres, his DA contact, a man who answered his phone at nearly any hour because the work he did not recognize the concept of business hours. The call went to voicemail. Marco said, "I have movement on the Mello case. Call me back." He hung up. He opened his case file on the passenger seat. He uncapped a pen. He dated the page. He always dated the page. It was the first thing his training had given him, and the last habit he would ever surrender, because a record was only as good as its anchor in time. He wrote, 2:14 a.m. He wrote, Camille Okafor, hit and run I-395 over town ramp, 11:48 a.m. First contact recording, 11:10 a.m. Elapsed, 38 minutes. He underlined the 38 minutes. He looked at the underline for a long moment. He closed the file. He thought of Valentina. At Marta's house in Hialeah, in the kitchen, with the permit documents on the table. He thought of the particular quality of her stillness when she was processing something, the way her face didn't close off, but didn't offer anything either, the way she became entirely present to whatever she was working through. As if she understood that the work required her full attention, and she was not willing to give it anything less. He did not call her at 2:14 in the morning. He told himself it was because it was late and she needed to rest. He was honest enough, in the particular privacy of a car in a hospital parking lot at 2:14 in the morning, to admit to himself that this was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that he did not trust what he would say if she answered. The whole truth was that the line he had already crossed in a doorway in the rain was a line he was still processing, still turning over in the particular way that meant it had changed something rather than simply marked something. He did not call her. He sat in the parking lot. He watched the night. Cafeteria La Palma had been on that block of Okeechobee Road for longer than most of the people who ate there had been in the country, which was a fact the café seemed to know about itself and to have organized its entire physical presence around expressing. The tiled counter was original. The ceiling fans were original. The small television mounted high on the back wall, currently showing a Spanish-language morning news program with the sound turned low enough that it was providing texture rather than information, was perhaps not original, but it might as well have been. The café smelled of café con leche and pan tostado, and the particular warmth of a space that has been making the same things in the same way for a very long time, and has made peace with all of it. Valentina arrived 5 minutes early. Elena Santos was already there. She was a woman in her late 50s, small and precise, with the kind of stillness that comes not from ease, but from long practice of carefulness. She sat very straight in the plastic café chair, both hands around a café con leche she had not touched, and she was watching the door when Valentina came through it. She looked at Valentina for a long moment, The way a person looks at a face they have been imagining for 4 years and are now reconciling with the reality. Then something in her expression settled into a decision that had already been made a long time ago and was simply now arriving at its execution. They sat across from each other. The ceiling fan moved the warm air in slow circles. The television murmured about traffic on the turnpike. Elena looked at Valentina and said, "You look like him." "I know," Valentina said. Elena nodded once, as if confirming something she had already accounted for, and then she began to speak. She had worked in the Miami-Dade City planning office for 22 years, she said. Her job had been document processing and permit tracking. She had not been a decision maker, had not been an inspector, had not held any of the positions that carried formal authority. She had been the person who knew where every document was and what it said and what it was supposed to say and when it had arrived and when it had left and whether the record matched itself the way a healthy record was supposed to match itself. In 22 years, she had become extraordinarily good at noticing when a record did not match itself. Ernesto Reyes had been a city inspector she worked with frequently over a decade. He was meticulous, she said, and she said the word with the specific warmth of someone who has found that quality rare enough to admire. The kind of man who read every line of every document, who pushed back when things didn't line up, who made enemies slowly over time because he refused to be careless with public land, and the people who wanted public land to be treated carelessly found him, in this, persistently inconvenient. 3 weeks before he died, Elena said, and she did not soften the word, she said died, not passed or was lost or any of the graceful ellipses people used. He came to my office. After hours. He brought an envelope. She described the envelope. Plain, letter-sized, sealed. Inside, a USB drive. He placed it on her desk. He looked at her with the expression of a man who was calm not because the situation was calm, but because he had made a decision about how to move through it. He said, "Keep this safe. Don't tell anyone. If anything happens to me, give it to someone who comes asking about the Port District permits." He was calm, Elena said. He was not frightened. Or if he was frightened, he had put the fear somewhere else and was working around it. He was resolute. That's the word. Valentina said, "Did he tell you what was on the drive?" "He told me enough." Elena set down the café con leche she still had not drunk. He said he had documented proof that a permit approval bearing his signature was going to be fraudulent. That someone was planning to submit an approval in his name for a Port District land acquisition, and that the approval was not one he had given and would not give. He said the land had environmental problems that had been deliberately obscured in the submitted survey documents. He said he had an appointment with the City Ethics Board for the following Monday. He never made it to Monday. Valentina said nothing. The ceiling fan turned. A man at the counter ordered a cortadito and the woman behind the counter made it without looking, by memory, by the accumulated practice of thousands of cortaditos that had preceded this one. Elena reached into her purse. She placed the USB drive on the table between them. It was small, ordinary, the kind of object you could buy in a pack of 5 at a drugstore for $8. Black plastic casing, a silver cap that had gotten a little scratched from 4 years of being moved from one safe place to another safe place. It did not look like anything. It was not supposed to look like anything. That was the point. Valentina looked at it. She did not pick it up yet. "Why didn't you come forward?" she said. "After he died. After they ruled it an accident." Elena looked out the cafe window. The street beyond, a woman walking a small dog, a man on a bicycle, a delivery truck completing its slow turn. The absolute ordinary persistence of a neighborhood going about its morning. She looked at all of this for a long moment and Valentina did not rush her. "I was afraid," Elena said finally to the window. "I had a son in high school. I had a job. I had spent 22 years doing a job carefully and quietly, and I had not made enemies, and I did not want to make enemies, she stopped. She looked back at Valentina. I told myself it was an accident. I needed it to be an accident, because the alternative required something of me that I didn't know if I had. I'm sorry. Valentina picked up the USB drive. She closed her hand around it. She held it in her palm for a moment and felt its weight, which was negligible, and felt the other weight, which was not. Then she said, "You came forward now." Elena looked at her. "You were asking the right questions," she said. He said to wait until someone was asking the right questions. And you were. The ceiling fan turned. The television murmured. Outside, a man on a bicycle rang his bell at no one in particular, and the sound of it was so cheerful and so entirely unrelated to anything happening inside this cafe that it was almost funny, and then it wasn't. And then Valentina closed her fingers all the way around the USB drive and put it in her jacket pocket. She looked at Elena Santos. She said, "Thank you for keeping it safe." Elena nodded once. She finally picked up her café con leche, and it had been sitting long enough to be cold, and she drank it anyway. She drove back to Marta's house with the USB drive in her jacket pocket, aware of it the entire way, not with the obsessive checking of someone who doesn't trust themselves to keep something, but with the particular awareness of someone carrying something that has been a long time in transit and has now arrived, finally, in the hands it was meant for. Her father had made a record. He had sat somewhere at his kitchen table, in his car, at his desk at the city planning office after hours when everyone else had gone home, and he had collected what he had found, and he had given it to a woman he trusted and said, "Keep this safe." He had known something might happen. He had not run. He had been afraid, or not afraid, or some composite of the two that was more complicated than either word could hold, and he had made a record anyway. He had trusted that the record would eventually find someone willing to use it. He had trusted, specifically, that someone would eventually ask the right questions. She had been asking the wrong questions for 4 years. She had been asking, how did this happen, and why didn't anyone stop it, and why does the world keep building on top of what it breaks? She had been asking those questions of the air and the city and the permit documents, and she had been receiving answers that were architectural, structural, impersonal, the answers that systems give when you ask them to account for themselves. Tonight she had asked the right question, which was simply, what did he leave behind? And the answer was, this. The USB in her pocket. A record, made by a careful man, kept by a frightened woman who found her courage 4 years too late and exactly on time. She dialed Marco from the burner phone. He picked up on the second ring, and she could hear in that speed, in the particular quality of his immediate attention, that he had not been sleeping. She thought he had probably not slept much. She thought she understood something, suddenly, about the kind of man who ran an investigation off the books for 6 weeks, not because he didn't trust the system, but because the system had required something of him before, and he had given it everything he had, and it hadn't been enough, and he was not willing to extend that particular trust again until he was certain of what he was handing over. "I have it," she said. She gave it to me. A beat. Then, tell me. She told him about Elena. She told him what Elena had said, the office, the 22 years, the evening visit, the sealed envelope, the instructions. She told him what Elena had said the drive contained, the unsigned permit, photographs of Voss and Mello at the Port District site, and a voice memo. 3 days before he died, recorded in her father's voice. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted long enough to become specific, not an absence of response, but a response in itself. The silence of a man receiving information that changes the shape of everything he has been building and realizing simultaneously that it makes the structure stronger and more terrible and more necessary. His voice, Marco said. Not a question. Just the 2 words, landed carefully. Yes. Another silence, longer. Then, "I'm coming to Marta's." "I'll wait," she said. She hung up. The palmetto palms along the expressway moved in the morning wind, slow, indifferent, entirely themselves. Miami in the morning before the heat arrived was a different city, the sky still carrying some of the night's violet, the light coming in at an angle that made even the concrete interchanges look like they had considered their own existence. It was the 1 hour of the day when the city felt like it might be forgivable for all the things it had been, and all the things it had done, and all the people it had built on and over and around without consent. The USB drive was in her pocket. Her father was in the drive. The morning was here. She drove. Marco arrived at Marta's 20 minutes after Valentina. Marta, who was, as she had always been, the kind of woman who processed information by doing something useful with her hands, put 2 cups of café on the table without being asked and looked at Marco with the particular expression of a woman assessing a man her cousin has called at 8:30 in the morning during a crisis and finding him, if not satisfactory, at least not inadequate. Then she said something in rapid Spanglish to Valentina, which was not a question, but contained the answer to several of them, and left the kitchen. The kitchen was very quiet with just the 2 of them. The children's drawings on the refrigerator. The mango-shaped magnet. The particular morning light of Hialeah coming through the small window above the sink, falling on the laminate counter in a way that made even the laminate look like it was doing its best. Valentina plugged the USB into her laptop. The documents first. The unsigned permit appeared on the screen, and they both leaned forward because they had been working from the forged version, from the version that bore Ernesto Reyes's falsified signature, and now here was the original, his name on the earlier review documents, his careful professional notations in the margin of the preliminary approval, and then the final approval page blank. The signature line empty. His name typed below it in the official font, and above it, nothing. The space where he would have signed and had refused to sign and had been murdered for refusing to sign. They looked at it for a moment. Then the photographs. 7 images, slightly grainy in the way of images taken quickly and covertly with a phone camera held at an angle designed not to be noticed. The Port District construction site. She recognized it from the blueprints, from the survey reports, from the documents she had spent months designing around. And in the photographs, 2 figures. A woman in a cream blazer, perfectly composed, standing at the edge of the cleared land with a document in her hands and pointing at something on it. A heavy-set man in a dark shirt beside her, leaning over the document, his hand on it. "That's Diana," Valentina said. Marco was looking at the second photograph, where the man's face was more clearly visible. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The man is Christian Mello." Valentina looked at him across the laptop screen. They looked at each other for 1 full second, the length of a confirmation that something they had theorized has become real, the particular vertigo of certainty after sustained uncertainty. Then, the voice memo. Valentina moved the mouse to the audio file. The cursor hovered over it. She stopped. Her hand was on the trackpad and she had stopped, and she did not fully understand, in that moment, why she had stopped except that she did understand, and it was simply this. Her father's voice was in that file. And she had not heard her father's voice in 4 years, and once she opened it, she would have heard it, and the hearing could not be undone. Marco looked at her. Not with impatience. He had never offered her impatience. Not once. Not in any of the rooms they had been in together, but with the exact quality of attention that had characterized him from the first moment she understood he was truly paying it. Complete, unhurried, entirely present. He said, "You don't have to do it right now." "I know," she said. She clicked play. Ernesto Reyes's voice filled the small Hialeah kitchen. It was the voice of a man in his mid-50s with a slight Havana-inflected accent that had been worn smooth by 30 years in Miami, not erased, but rounded at the edges, the way a stone gets rounded by water without losing its essential shape. He spoke in the particular register of a man making an official record, measured, deliberate, choosing each word with the care of someone who understands that records outlast the people who make them and must therefore be able to stand on their own. This is Ernesto Reyes, City Building Inspector for Miami-Dade Planning and Zoning, employee number 4471. The date is he stated the date. The time is 7:22 p.m. I am making this record because I believe something may happen before I can file my report with the City Ethics Board. That meeting is scheduled for Monday morning at 9. He continued in the same measured register, the recording holding the shape of the room around him without needing to name it. I was asked, directly and through others, to approve a Port District land survey permit for the Solara development, submitted by Voss and Crane Development Partners. I reviewed the permit file and the environmental survey. The survey does not match what I found during my site inspection. The contamination levels were reported far below what they should be. This is not a minor error. If the land were reported accurately, it could not be approved for a high-density residential project. His voice was very steady. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has rehearsed what he is going to say, not because he needs the rehearsal, but because he wants to be sure he says all of it. I have refused to approve this permit. I have communicated this refusal to a representative of the managing partner of Voss and Crane. I am going to the Ethics Board on Monday because the correct channels exist for this reason, and I intend to use them. And then his voice changed very slightly, the way a hand changes when it releases a grip it has been holding for a long time and simply opens. He was no longer an official register. He was simply a man, speaking into a recording that he hoped would never need to be heard and was making anyway because hope and preparation were not the same thing. If something happens before I can report this, this is what I know. This is what I found. And whoever is listening, I'm sorry it took so long for someone to ask. I should have filed sooner. I knew something was wrong, and I kept trusting the process. I should have acted sooner. Then, in Spanish, very quietly, he said, Valentina, mi nina, if you ever hear this, say que eres fuerte.
Ya lo eres. Yo te vi crecer.
I know you are strong. You already are. I watched you grow. The recording ended. Marta's kitchen refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the Hialeah neighborhood, a rooster crowed, an entirely real rooster, in an entirely real yard 3 houses down, doing what Hialeah roosters do at 8:40 in the morning without consulting anyone about whether this was an appropriate moment. The absurdity of it was so complete and so specific that it was almost a kindness, a small, ridiculous true thing in the middle of something enormous and true. Valentina had not moved. Marco had not moved. She sat at Marta's kitchen table with her father's voice still hanging in the air of a kitchen that smelled of sofrito and café, and she did not cry, and she did not speak, and the silence was not empty, it was full, completely full. Full of 4 years and a forged signature and a USB drive kept safe in a frightened woman's purse and a Tuesday morning that had been supposed to be a Monday and a daughter who had spent 4 years trying to know something that her father had already. At 7:22 p.m. on a Thursday night 4 years ago, taken the trouble to say clearly. She sat with all of it. Marco sat with her. He did not speak. He did not move toward her or away from her. He simply remained, which was, she thought, when she was finally able to think again, the precise and correct thing. Act 2. 4 days. What we have. Marco moved with the systematic efficiency of a man who had, over 15 years, learned to partition himself into the part that felt things and the part that worked, and to work first, always first, because the feeling would wait and the evidence might not. He set the laptop to one side of the table and began photographing each document on his phone, the permit pages in sequence, the photographs of Voss and Mello at the site, the audio files waveform visible on the screen. He transferred the voice memo via AirDrop to a second device. He documented the USB drive itself, serial number, physical condition, chain of custody as he understood it from Valentina's account of Elena Santos. He called the forensic document specialist, the professor Valentina had originally engaged, and arranged for the scanned original and signed permit to be cross-referenced against the forged version. The specialist, a woman accustomed to being called at unusual hours by people with urgent needs, said she could turn it around in 12 hours. Marco thanked her and hung up. He dialed Torres. This time Torres answered on the third ring, not the second, which meant he had seen the caller ID and decided, and then answered, which meant he had decided yes, which was the only thing that mattered. Marco outlined what he had without naming Valentina directly. He laid out the structure, the forensic forgery, the photographs of Voss and Mello at the Port District site, the voice memo of a dead city inspector refusing the permit and stating his intention to report, recorded 3 days before his fatal accident that was not an accident. Torres was quiet on the other end for long enough that Marco checked the connection. Then Torres said, "How long have you been sitting on this, Duval?" 24 hours since the USB. 6 weeks on the broader case. Another silence. Then I need everything you have. Today. I need 48 hours to protect a civilian source. You have 36, Torres said. 36 hours, Marco. After that, I move with or without you. The call ended. Marco set the phone on the table and looked at Valentina across the laptop screen. She was watching him with the particular stillness that had become, in the past several days, one of the things he recognized as distinctly hers, the stillness of someone who is processing everything and choosing very carefully what to do with it. She said, 36 hours. Yes. The vote is in 4 days. I know. A beat. She looked at the documents spread on the table. She said, he recorded that memo 3 days before he died. He had the ethics board appointment on Monday. They killed him on a Tuesday. She paused. Someone found out he was going to report. Marco said, someone inside the planning office or inside Voss and Crane who had access to the inspector schedule, who knew the Monday appointment was coming. Elena, she said. She gave us the drive, Marco said. I don't think she's the leak. I don't either, Valentina said. But someone told them he was going to report. She was quiet for a moment. Someone close enough to see the blueprint. They looked at each other across the table. They did not say anything else about it. There would be time for that. There was 36 hours to build what they needed to build, and they had both, independently and by different routes, arrived at the understanding that time spent on what was already past was time not spent on what still lay ahead. Valentina poured them both more café. It was 9:40 in the morning, and they were running out of time, and they were also, for the first time since this began, running it together. She thought that mattered more than she expected it to. Lieutenant Sara Chen's office at the Coral Gables precinct was exactly the size and shape of a space that communicated. I work here, and I have been working here for long enough to have earned a door that closes, and I use the door. She was behind her desk when Marco knocked and entered. She looked up at him with the face of a woman who had been watching him for 6 weeks and had questions she had been choosing not to ask, and who had decided, sometime this morning, to stop choosing. He closed the door. He sat down. He laid out the case. Not everything. He was not yet ready to give her everything, because everything included a name he was not ready to offer to the official record before he could guarantee what the official record would do with it. But enough. The Ernesto Reyes incident report, the pattern of coached witness statements, the forensic forgery finding on the permit, the photographs of Voss and Mello at the site, the voice memo. The timeline of the hit and run on Camille Okafor relative to her contact with him about the recording. He laid it out in order, and she listened with the face of a woman simultaneously processing what she was hearing and calculating its implications for her department, her career, and her conscience, in that order or possibly not in that order. Because Sara Chen was not entirely predictable in the ordering of her priorities, which was one of the things Marco had always respected about her. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the documents he had placed in front of her. Then she said, "How long has this been off the books?" 6 weeks. You should have come to me at 2. I know. If I open this officially now, Duval, it goes up the chain. That means exposure for your source before we're ready to protect them. I know. I'm asking for 48 hours. She looked at him. You have 36 hours. Same as Torres. After that, this goes official whether you're ready or not. And your civilian source, whoever they are, needs to be somewhere safe. Not a cousin's house in Hialeah. She looked back at the documents. From this point forward, I want everything documented. Every contact. Every piece of evidence. Every conversation. You're not off books anymore. Understood, Marco said. He stood. He moved toward the door. Chen said, without looking up from the file, "Your partner would have come to me sooner." Marco stopped. He stood in her office with his hand not quite on the door handle and the specific weight of that sentence doing exactly what she had meant it to do. Darius Okafor had been a man who trusted the system he worked within, who came to Chen when he was 2 weeks in rather than 6, who believed that the institution, properly engaged, was capable of doing the right thing. He had also been a man who was dead at 31 on a traffic stop that should have been routine. I know that too, Marco said. He walked out of her office and down the precinct hallway past the administrative desks, past the board where the open cases were pinned, past the coffee machine that no one had cleaned since before he could remember. He walked the way he always walked through this corridor, with the economy of someone who has learned to keep his internal weather off his face, because institutional spaces did not reward visible weather. He thought about what Chen had said. He thought about the 6 weeks he had kept this off books and why. He told himself it was about protecting the source. He told himself it was about the chain of command and the Mello investigation's federal complications and the need to build the case strong enough that it couldn't be dismissed. All of those things were true. None of them were the complete truth. The complete truth was that he was a man who kept his own counsel as a form of penance, who worked alone because working alone was a way of making sure that when something went wrong, only he paid for it. He had been paying for Darius for 3 years. He had not figured out how to stop. He was beginning slowly, dangerously, in the specific way that beginnings feel when they are genuine, to let someone else share the load. He got to his car. He drove toward Hialeah. He had 36 hours. Valentina called Rafi from Marta's kitchen while Marco was at the precinct. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he had been sitting with the phone in his hand waiting for it to ring, which was exactly what she had expected, and which broke something small and peripheral in her chest. "I'm okay," he said, before she could ask. He always did this, answered the question she hadn't yet voiced, because he knew she was going to voice it, and he wanted her to know he had already considered it. "Tell me what happened," she said. He told her what happened. This time, it wasn't a messenger. One of Mello's people had called a cell directly. They said Valentina had 48 hours to return the USB drive to a drop location they would text by midnight. If she returned it, Rafi's debt would disappear. If she didn't, the caller stopped there and hung up. The unfinished threat was the threat. He didn't finish it, Rafi said. He just stopped talking and hung up. I think that's the point. You fill in the rest. Are you still at Dario's? Yes. Stay there. Don't go anywhere. Don't meet anyone you don't know. She paused. I have the drive, Rafi. I'm not returning it. Val. I'm not returning it, she said again. Not louder, she didn't raise her voice. She simply said it again with the particular quality of a decision that has been made completely and is simply being communicated now, not debated. I am finishing what Papa started. I need you to trust me. She waited as Rafi took in what she had said, the life around him continuing at the edges of the crisis he was living in. Then Rafi said, and the smallness and the enormity of this arrived simultaneously, the way a simple sentence can contain both, he would be proud of you. Don't, she said. Not yet. Val. After, she said. Tell me after. She hung up. She stood at the kitchen window of Marta's house. The street below, a neighbor's dog circling something in the yard, a child on a bicycle being called home by someone whose voice carried the particular music of a parent who had said this name many times today and had not yet reached the limit of their patience. The absolute ordinary persistence of a neighborhood that had nothing to do with any of this. Her father had recorded a memo at 7:22 on a Thursday evening, calm and deliberate, knowing what might come next. He had not run. He had not returned the USB equivalent, whatever that was for him, whatever the equivalent had been of simply letting it go and approving the permit and living the rest of his life without the weight of what he knew. He had been afraid, or he had been something that was larger than afraid, and he had kept going. She went back to the table. She kept working. She drove to the Solara project construction site, a decision she did not fully explain to herself until she was already on the I-95 South ramp, already pointed in the right direction. Already committed to arriving somewhere she had not consciously decided to go. She had learned to trust this kind of movement. Her father had called it the way a building tells you what it needs, the sense that the structure already has the correct answer and you are simply the person who has to arrive at it. The site was a vast footprint along the Biscayne waterfront, cleared land and rebar and concrete forms rising from the earth with the particular energy of something in the process of becoming. A construction fence ran the perimeter, chain link and privacy screening, with a Voss and crane sign posted at the main entrance, the corporate logo, the project name in clean sans serif type, and a rendering of the finished building. 42 stories of glass and steel and balconies facing the bay, gleaming and aspirational and entirely confident of its own future. At the bottom of the rendering, in small text, Design architecture by Voss and Crane in collaboration with Valentina Reyes. Her name. Small. There. She parked on the street outside the fence and looked at the site through the windshield. From here she could see the entire footprint, or most of it. She knew the rest from the blueprints she had spent months refining, the plans she had worked on with the particular care she brought to everything she designed. The belief she had carried into every decision about load and stress and flow that she was building something that would last, something that would be good for the people who would live in it, something that would, as her father had always said about her work, do right by. The ground it stood on. The ground it stood on was contaminated. Her father had said it in the memo, clearly and specifically, environmental contamination, deliberately obscured in the submitted survey documents. She had designed a 42-story residential building for contaminated land. People would move into it. People would bring their children there. They would plant things on the balconies and have dinner parties and fall asleep to the sound of the bay, and they would not know what was underneath them. She thought about the hours she had spent on the Solara project. The specific pleasure of the design problems it had posed, how to bring light into the lower floors, how to orient the units to maximize bay views without sacrificing the floor plans, how to think about the shared spaces in a way that created community rather than just proximity. She had loved this work. She had been genuinely proud of it. And every hour she had put into it had been, in a way she could not have known, in service of something that should never have been built. She took out her phone. She photographed the site, the cleared land, the rebar rising, the concrete forms. She photographed the sign with its bright rendering. She photographed her name at the bottom of the sign. She sent the photos to Marco with a single line. He was right about the contamination. It's in the original survey notes if you know where to look. She put the car in gear. She drove away from the building that was supposed to be her future, the commission that was going to establish her, the project that was going to put her name on something 42 stories high above Biscayne Bay, the work she had believed in. She drove away from it on a Brickell afternoon, with the bay flashing in her peripheral vision, with the construction cranes growing smaller in the rearview mirror. She did not look back. She was beginning, she thought, to understand why that was the correct decision. Some buildings you leave. Some futures you let go not because you have given up, but because you have found something that matters more than the thing you thought you wanted. She drove north. She was going to need new blueprints. She was okay with that. Torres called Marco back with a development he had not been expecting. A journalist at the Miami Herald named Petra Wade had been building a story on Christian Melo for 3 years and had reached out to the DA 3 months ago claiming to have a recording of a conversation between Melo and an unidentified business partner. A conversation at dinner, approximately 4.5 years ago, in which a Port District land deal was discussed and in which an obstructing city official would need, in the language of the recording, to be managed. Torres had been sitting on it because Petra refused to hand the recording to law enforcement without legal protection. She had watched journalists give recordings to federal agencies and lose them in procedural quagmires before publication, and she was not willing to do that. Marco said, "Get me her number." Torres said, "It's already in your phone." Marco said, "When did you put it there?" Torres said, "About 10 minutes ago, when it became clear this case was converging." Marco called Petra Wade. She picked up on the second ring, and in the quality of her immediate answer, he heard 3 months of waiting for law enforcement to return a call that had not been returned. He said his name and his badge number, and she said, "I know who you are. Talk." They talked for 40 minutes. Petra Wade was, in those 40 minutes, everything her reputation suggested and nothing that reputation had oversimplified. She was whip-smart, the kind of intelligence that operated by asking the most inconvenient possible question and then following the answer wherever it led, regardless of convenience. She was skeptical in the precise way that a person who has been working a story for 3 years becomes skeptical, not cynical, not disengaged, but rigorously unwilling to accept anything that wasn't nailed down from at least 2 independent directions. She was tired of waiting. She was not afraid of Diana Voss. She had been researching Diana Voss for 38 of the past 48 months, but she was appropriately respectful of what Diana Voss could do to a story that published without sufficient corroboration. The recording she had, dinner somewhere in Brickell, 4.5 years ago, acoustic environment consistent with a private room in an upscale restaurant. 2 voices. One she had independently confirmed as Christian Melo through voice analysis. The second, a woman, measured, precise, with the particular vocal quality of someone accustomed to rooms where their voice was the most important one in it. Voss says, "The Reyes problem needs to be resolved before the acquisition finalizes." Melo responds. His response is not explicit. It is the response of a man speaking to someone who understands what is being asked and is confirming that he understands. In context, given what Marco now knew, given what the voice memo contained, given the timeline of Ernesto Reyes's Monday ethics board appointment and Tuesday death, the response was not ambiguous at all. "How did you get it?" Marco said. "A former associate of Melo's who wanted out of his organization," Petra said. "Came to me 4 years ago. Gave me the recording on condition of complete source protection. I have honored that condition and will continue to honor it. Will you share the recording with law enforcement?" I'll share it if law enforcement confirms on the record that it supports an active federal investigation. And when an arrest is made, I get first publication rights. Not 30 days later. When it happens, Marco said, I need to make a call. She said, you have until 6 p.m. today. He called Torres. Torres, after a pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to last for a federal agent to calculate the implications of a deal with a Miami Herald journalist, said, make the deal. Marco called Petra back. He said, we have a deal. She emailed him the audio file within 5 minutes. He sat in the parking structure and opened it on his phone, and he listened to it with the phone pressed to his ear and his eyes closed, because some things you listen to better in the dark. Diana Voss's voice. The measured precision of it, every syllable placed with the deliberateness of someone who had learned, long ago, that precision was power. The Reyes problem, she said. She said his name like he was a line item on a budget that needed to be resolved before the quarter closed. She said it with the particular coldness of someone who had never once had to look Ernesto Reyes in the face and so could refer to him this way without feeling anything at all. Marco opened his eyes. He opened the Reyes file. He wrote the date. He wrote, Day 8. He looked at the date at the top of the file, the date he had opened it, 6 weeks ago, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when he had pulled the incident report on a hunch and found the coached witness statements and understood that the hunch was correct. He thought about the distance between that Tuesday and this one and all the ground covered in between. He put the car in drive. He went back to work. She had come back to her apartment. She had made that decision sometime in the late afternoon, somewhere on the drive back from the Solara site. The quiet understanding that she could not live in someone else's house indefinitely and that retreating to safety was not the same thing as being safe. Safety was not, she was learning, a location. She had gone home to her apartment on the 10th floor on Brickell, with its high windows and its drafting table and the blueprint rolls stacked in the corner, and the particular quality of a space that had been designed around the work she did and looked, tonight, like everything she had built it around was being reconsidered. Marco was there. She had called him, or he had come, or both of these things had happened in the particular way of two people who have arrived at a point where the question of who reached out first has become mostly irrelevant. He had brought the files. She had the laptop. They sat at her drafting table, the table she used for every building she had ever designed, the table where she had spent hundreds of hours making things that were meant to stand, and they went through everything together. Ernesto's USB, the voice memo, the unsigned permit, the photographs of Voss and Mello. Petra Wade's recording. The forensic forgery confirmation that had come through from the professor at 9:47 p.m. The signature on the approved permit was definitively not consistent with Ernesto Reyes's authenticated signature samples across 14 years of professional records. Definitive. Documented. The kind of finding that held in federal court. Two investigations, fully merged. Every strand they had been following separately, the forged permit, the coached witness statements, the hit and run, the Mello organization's shell companies, Guillermo Paz's private confession, the contaminated land survey, now visible as a single structure. A single design, built by people who believed it would stand because it had stood so far, because 4 years of a city accepting the word accident had seemed to confirm that it would keep standing. At some point the work was done, or as done as it could be tonight, as done as the next 12 hours permitted. Marco leaned back in the drafting chair. Valentina leaned back in her chair. The city glittered outside the high windows, the bay beyond the towers, the port cranes standing still above the water, the lights of Fisher Island a scattered constellation to the south. Miami at midnight, doing what Miami at midnight always did, insisting on its own extravagance regardless of whatever was happening inside its buildings. He said, after this is over. Don't, she said. Valentina. I know what you're going to say. Do you? She looked at him across the drafting table, across the documents, across the laptop screen, across the accumulated evidence of everything they had built together in the past 6 weeks. She looked at him with the complete attention that was, she had realized some time ago, the thing she trusted most about him, that he gave it, always, without reservation, without the performance of attention that some people substituted for the real thing. He was simply, always, entirely there. You're going to say that when this case closes, everything becomes less complicated, she said. I was going to say that even if it doesn't get less complicated, he stopped. Looked at her. Tried again. I'm not pretending anymore, Valentina. Not about you. Not about what this is. He stopped again. Not because he didn't know the word. Because the word was large enough that saying it in a room this late, in a moment this complicated, in a case this open, felt like it required more precision than he currently had available. So he left it where it was unfinished, present, understood. I know, she said. I need you to actually know, he said. Not just hear it. She turned in her chair to face him fully, away from the documents, away from the laptop, away from the city outside the window. Toward him. I know, she said. And I need you to know I'm not pretending either. The city breathed outside. The drafting table held its blueprints. They stayed. Act 3. The vote. She was awake, and being awake was costing her something, and she was paying it without complaint and with the expression of a woman who was furious about the circumstances and had decided to convert the fury into usefulness, which was, Marco thought, the most Camille thing possible. She had a broken collarbone immobilized in a brace, a concussion that was going to require several weeks of very boring recovery, and the specific wince of someone for whom the word comfortable was currently theoretical. She was also, he noted, reading something on a tablet that had been propped on the hospital tray, and he was fairly certain it was not a novel. He sat in the chair beside her bed. She looked at him. He said, "How are you?" "Don't," she said. Which was, he understood, the answer. He said, "I didn't have the recording. I need you to know that. It wasn't your recording they were after the meeting itself. The fact of it happening at all." She said, "I know. Petra Wade had it." She closed her eyes for a moment. Good. Good that someone had it. "They knew you were coming to meet me," Marco said. "Someone told them." "I know that too." She opened her eyes. "It's someone in the council office. A deputy planning director named Rodrigo Cortez. I've suspected for months. He has access to council members' calendars. He has access to meeting schedules. I couldn't prove it." She looked at him directly. "I'm telling you now. Do with that what you need to do." Marco wrote the name in his notebook. He said, "Can you testify?" "When the time comes." "I'll testify from this bed if I have to," she said. "Let's aim for a chair." She almost smiled, a fraction of a smile, suppressed by the concussion pain that made large facial movements inadvisable, but present. Then the fraction faded and she looked at him with the particular seriousness of a woman who has something to say and has been deciding whether to say it since he walked in. "Marco," she said. He stopped at the door. He turned. "Darius would have worked this case the same way," she said. "Too long off the books. Protecting everyone but himself." She held his eyes. "And then he would have told you to stop punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault." Marco stood in the hospital room doorway. The light from the corridor fell across the floor between them. He said, "I'm working on it." She said, "Work faster." He nodded once. He left. He walked down the hospital corridor, and he did not let the weight of what she had said settle all at once. He parceled it, the way he parceled most things that mattered, filed it for later when he had the space to hold it properly. But he felt it shift, very slightly, the thing he had been carrying. Not gone, not resolved, but shifted, the way a load shifts when a second person takes hold of their end. 3 days to the vote. A federal conference room in downtown Miami, clean, windowless, fluorescent. For people around a table, Marco, Valentina, Torres, and Petra Wade. The evidence arranged between them like an architectural plan spread for review. Every element named, every connection documented, every load-bearing point confirmed from at least 2 directions. Ernesto's USB drive. The forensic forgery confirmation. The Petra Wade recording. The sworn statement of Guillermo Paz, who had arrived that morning with his daughter seated beside him, her hand in his, and had given the federal prosecutor a full account of how the witness statements in the Ernesto Reyes accident investigation had been coached by a Voss and Crane representative 3 days after the death. His daughter had held his hand the entire time and had not let go. The Shell Company car registration tying Christian Mello's organization to the vehicle that had been following Valentina. The contaminated land survey buried in the Solara project's original environmental documentation. The name Rodrigo Cortez, Deputy Planning Director, and his access to Camille Okafor's calendar. Torres went through every item. He asked his questions specific, precise. The questions of a man who had been building a federal case against Christian Mello for 2 years and was now watching every strand he had been following independently converge in a room with 3 other people who had been pulling from different directions on the same thread. Then he reached the voice memo. He listened to it through the speaker on Marco's phone, the same recording that had filled Marta's kitchen in Hialeah, filling now a federal conference room under fluorescent light. The 2 spaces as different as 2 spaces could be and the voice itself no different at all. Still Ernesto Reyes, calm and deliberate and finally, irrevocably here. Torres was quiet for a long moment after it ended. Then he said, "He recorded this 3 days before he died?" Valentina said, "Yes. And he knew something might be coming." "He knew enough to make a record," she said. "I don't think he knew exactly what form it would take. I think he was hoping he was wrong." She paused. He wasn't wrong. Torres looked at the table. He was a man in his late 40s with the bearing of someone who had spent 2 decades in federal law enforcement and had developed, over those decades, the particular quality of controlled anger that keeps itself precisely useful rather than dissipating into frustration. He kept his eyes on the table for a moment, and then he looked at Valentina and he said, "I'm sorry about your father, Ms. Reyes." She said, "Help me finish what he started." Torres said, "That I can do." The subpoena was filed at 3:47 p.m. Marco sent Valentina a text with no words, just the time. She sent back the word good. He stared at the word on his phone screen for a moment. He thought, yes. And also, and now everything that happens next. Before the subpoena reached Diana Voss's attorney, by hours, perhaps by minutes, Diana called Valentina to her office. She was, as she always was, immaculate, cream blazer, Biscayne Bay visible beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her hands folded on the desk with the precise composure of a woman who had navigated every previous crisis through force of personality and force of position and intended, apparently, to attempt this one the same way. The corner office was exactly as it had always been, the art, the furniture, the particular quality of a space designed to make the person across the desk feel small by making the room feel large. Valentina had always understood this about the office. Today she felt it as its own kind of evidence. Diana looked at her across the desk and dropped completely, entirely, without transition, the warmth she had maintained across 2 years of professional partnership. Not hostile. Not frightened. Simply, finished with pretense. The mask was off, and what was underneath it was the original face, which was colder and more certain of itself than the mask had ever been. She said, "You are a gifted architect. One of the best I have seen in 20 years of building the city. What you are doing right now will destroy your career." Valentina said, "You had my father killed." Diana was quiet for exactly 1 beat, the beat of a woman deciding not to deny, which was itself the most clarifying thing she had said in the conversation. Then she said, "Walk away," Diana said. "Keep the Solara commission. I'll make sure the project continues with your name on it. Keep Bayside too. I'll add 2 more commissions from our portfolio. Your brother's debt disappears tonight completely. You walk out of this building, you go back to your work, and this conversation never happened." She said it without inflection. She laid it on the table the way you lay a contract on a table. This for that. Here is what each party receives. Here is what each party gives. Clean. Professional. The offer of a woman who had always solved problems with the correct application of the correct resource, and who was making, now, her best assessment of what the correct resource was. Valentina looked at the woman across the desk. She looked at the power of her, the precision of it, the complete self-sufficiency of it, the particular coldness of someone who had done terrible things and organized her entire life around them so thoroughly, for so long, that they no longer registered as crimes. They registered as decisions. Cost-benefit analyses, executed correctly, producing the expected outcomes. She thought about her father's voice at 7:22 p.m. on a Thursday, calm and deliberate and refusing. She thought about a USB drive in a frightened woman's purse for 4 years, kept safe because someone had made a promise and kept it even when keeping it was costly. She thought about Marco in a conference room downtown, building the case, sitting with the weight of it, holding the work and the feeling both without letting either one destroy the other. She thought about what it would mean to walk out of this office with the commission and the projects and Rafi's debt cleared and her father still dead on a Tuesday morning for no reason that anyone would ever officially have to acknowledge. She stood up. "You should call your lawyer, Diana," she said. She walked out. She did not look back. Not at the desk, not at Diana Voss behind it, not at the view of the bay from the corner office that she had always found genuinely beautiful and would now never be able to see without also seeing what it cost. She walked through the Voss and Crane offices, past the drafting stations where she had spent 2 years working, past the conference room where she had presented the Solara project blueprints to a room full of people who had been complicit or adjacent to complicity or carefully uninformed, and into the lobby. The elevator arrived. She stepped inside. The doors closed. The building rose around the elevator as it descended, and the city appeared through the lobby glass as she landed, and she walked out into the Miami morning. The door closed behind her. She stood on the sidewalk in the heat, in the light, in the absolute indifferent brightness of a Brickell morning in June. She called Marco from the street outside Voss and Crane. He answered on the first ring. She made the offer, Valentina said. Commission, projects, Rafi's debt. All of it. And, he said. I walked out. A pause. She didn't mention the subpoena. She wouldn't, Marco said. Her attorney knows. She's managing the timeline. A beat. Traffic moved past. A delivery van pulled out of a loading zone with the particular brash confidence of a vehicle that has somewhere to be. Valentina stood on the sidewalk and watched it go. Is it enough? She said. Everything we have, the memo, the recording, the forgery, when it reaches a federal prosecutor, is it enough? Torres says yes, Marco said. The voice memo combined with the Petra Wade recording and the forensic forgery, yes. The photographs place Voss and Mello at the site in the acquisition period. Guillermo Paz's sworn statement places a Voss representative at the scene of the coached witness statements. The chain is complete, she said, and the vote. Sara Chen is moving to have the Solara project vote suspended pending the federal investigation. The motion is being filed this afternoon. Camille is supporting it from her hospital bed. She's already submitted a written statement. The council will suspend. It has no other viable option. Valentina stood on Brickell Avenue in the Miami morning heat, the glass towers throwing light in every direction, the traffic constant, the city in full insistence of its own momentum, and she thought about a Monday morning 4 years ago that had never happened. Her father had made an appointment for 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. He had intended to walk into a city office on a Monday and file a report and begin the process that would have led, through the slow grinding mechanisms of institutional accountability, to something that looked very much like what was happening now. He had not made it to Monday. She said he was going to report it on a Monday. They killed him on a Tuesday. I know, Marco said. He was right about everything. Yes. She said, I need a minute. Take it, he said. I'll be here. She stood on the sidewalk in the morning light, and she took her minute. She took the full 60 seconds of it, the specific grief of vindication, not the clean, triumphant thing people imagined when they imagined being right, not the flood of relief she had perhaps expected to feel, but something more complicated. The grief of the person who has proved the terrible thing and must now stand in the truth of it with nowhere left to go but forward. To be right about an absence is still to hold the absence. To prove that something should not have happened is not the same as it not having happened. Both things were true. The evidence was in federal hands, and her father was still dead, and the morning light fell on everything regardless. She held the phone. She went forward. Evening. Marco came out of the Coral Gables precinct building at 6:47 p.m. through the main entrance, not the side door he usually used when he wanted to avoid conversation, which meant he was not avoiding conversation tonight, which meant something, and found Valentina leaning against his car in the parking lot, waiting. He stopped. He stood in the precinct doorway for a moment and looked at her there, in the evening light, in the parking lot, leaning against the car with her arms loosely crossed and her face turned slightly toward the sky, which was doing what Miami skies do in the golden hour, becoming briefly, unreasonably, extravagantly beautiful, as if the city knew it had things to apologize for, and this was its best and most reliable attempt. You didn't have to come here, he said. I know, she said. He walked across the parking lot to where she stood. He stood in front of her. The case, as it now existed, officially open, the Ernesto Reyes file reclassified from accidental death to active homicide investigation. The case now sitting at the intersection of Miami-Dade homicide and a federal investigation that would grow significantly larger before it concluded. Diana Voss's attorney had been in contact with the federal prosecutor's office since 4 p.m. The negotiation of her cooperation was beginning. Christian Mello's location was currently unknown. His attorneys were cooperating. Mello himself was not among the cooperating. Rafi's debt had been flagged as part of the federal investigation, which meant that Mello's organization could not collect while under federal scrutiny, which meant Rafi was safer tonight than he had been for a very long time. The Solara project vote had been suspended pending the federal investigation. Guillermo Paz had given his sworn statement with his daughter beside him, and she had held his hand the entire time and had not looked at him any differently when it was over. Camille Okafor was awake and reading the case file from her hospital bed. Elena Santos had been formally thanked by the federal prosecutor's office and had received that thanks with the specific quiet dignity of a woman who had waited 4 years to deserve it. None of this undid what happened on a Tuesday morning 4 years ago on a scaffold in the Port District. All of it mattered anyway. Both of those things were true and would remain true simultaneously for the rest of their lives, and the wisdom, Valentina thought, was in learning to hold both without asking one to cancel the other. Marco looked at her in the parking lot light. What do you want now? She said, to stand somewhere that isn't inside a building. Okay, he said. He took her hand. Not in a doorway in the rain. Not with the night around them and the privacy of a thing that could be called something other than what it was. In a parking lot in Coral Gables, in the evening, in the light that fell on everything equally and made no exception for a man and a woman who had built something difficult and true together and were standing in the result of it. In the open, where anyone could see. She let him. Miami held the final image at dusk, the sky performing its apology in rose and violet and the specific gold of a sun going down over the Everglades to the west. The light fell on all of it equally, the old neighborhood houses of coral gables with their banyan trees and their Mediterranean tile, the glass towers of Brickell throwing the last of the day back at the sky, the port cranes standing still above the water, the cleared lot along the waterfront where a scaffold once stood and where the ground beneath it held, still, what it had always held. All of it real. All of it in the same light. Ernesto Reyes wanted to protect the land. His daughter built on the truth instead. In Miami, sometimes, that is enough. Sometimes it is everything. Episode 4 Preview, The Reckoning. 3 days later. Diana Voss surrenders to federal authorities at 8:40 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, composed, her attorney beside her, her cream blazer precisely correct, her expression the expression of a woman who has decided, having lost every other option, to manage her defeat with the same precision she brought to everything else. The footage plays on every screen in the city, every morning program, every loop on the airport monitors, every phone in every coffee shop on Brickell Avenue. The city that has been built, in part, on what she built, watches her walk through a set of federal doors. Christian Mello is still missing. The DEA believes he left the country 12 hours before the subpoena was served, commercial flight out of Opa-locka Executive Airport, a private charter route that had been arranged, investigators determine, 18 hours before the subpoena was even filed. Someone warned him. Someone inside the investigation, someone with access to the timeline, the filing schedule, the precise sequence of steps, made a call. A name will surface. The name will be surprising. It is always the name that is surprising. Valentina is at her apartment, at her drafting table, going through the Solara Project's original environmental survey, not to continue the project. The project is suspended and will not survive the federal investigation. But because something Marco said about the contaminated land is bothering her. Something about the specific language in the technical appendix. She finds it buried on page 47 of a document designed to be unread, a notation about soil contamination boundaries. A coordinate set. A measurement. The contaminated area is larger than what was disclosed. Much larger. Larger than the Solara site. It extends beneath 3 adjacent city blocks. She calls Marco. She says, the contamination isn't just the Solara land. He says, how much more? She says a number. The silence on the other end is the silence of a man doing math he does not like the result of. Then he says, that's federal land, Valentina. She says, I know. He says, if Mello knew about the federal land, if the Port District acquisition was about the federal land and the Solara project was only ever the cover. She says, this was never just about one building. The city outside her window keeps glowing. The truth keeps opening. It does not stop because you have found the first layer. It goes down. Episode 4, The Reckoning. The story is only getting bigger. End of episode 3. Forbidden Love, Miami is an original work of fiction. All characters, organizations, events, and locations depicted in this series are entirely fictional and are not intended to represent any real person, organization, or event. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.